Whether it's more lockdowns, pandemic 2.0, World War III, or maybe just a collapse of our food supply chain, thanks, Biden, how long could your family survive? 2 weeks, 2 months, a year? And look, while prepping may seem overwhelming and expensive, there's actually some basic principles everyone should know and act on that could save your family's lives in a disaster scenario. Today, that's what we're going to focus on. So, welcome to Man in America. I am your host, Seth Holhouse. Before we jump in, two quick messages for you. First off, if you're not following me on social media, head over to Telegram right now. Search for Man in America. That's the place I'm most active. And in case big tech loses its tolerance for me and boots me off, Telegram is where I'll be at. Until Truth Social comes out, then I'll be on there really heavily as well. But right now, Telegram is the main place I'm at. And lastly, look, with inflation and a lot of instability in the markets, as we're going to talk about today, folks are looking for ways to protect their wealth. And I've always been one to recommend physical gold and silver. In the past year, a lot of you have asked me if I had any recommendations where to get it. Honestly, I was hesitant to recommend anyone because I used to work in this industry and there's a lot of shady dealers out there. However, after doing extensive research, I'm confident in recommending Noble Gold. I read through pages of reviews and I also called them as a customer to see how they handled the sale process and if their prices were fair and to make sure they don't use any kind of high pressure sales tactics. And they don't. So, look, you're never going to get a good deal on gold. If you do, it's probably fake or stolen, or it's fake and then stolen. And I wouldn't trust it. It's a commodity. So if it's cheap, there's something wrong with it. What you're looking for, though, is a fair transaction with someone you can trust. And honestly, I do recommend Noble Gold. They also specialize in IRA transfers, which allow you to take your IRA and move it into physical gold or silver and not have any taxes or penalties. So if you're unsure where the market's heading, which I certainly am, that could be a good idea. So if you want to learn more, open a new tab right now and go to goldwithseth.com. If you're watching live, open it, go back to it. Again, it's goldwithseth.com. As I mentioned, I used to be in the industry, so I know a little bit about it. If you have any questions and you just want my opinion on something, I'm not an expert, but I'll do my best. You can email me at gold@maninamerica.com. I'll personally respond to you. Again, it's gold@maninamerica.com. All right. Today's show. So I'm not sure if you watched my live show with Jeff Nyquist earlier this week, which was a little bit a little bit of a downer, I might say. But I think that it's while I don't necessarily agree with everything that Jeff was talking about, I think that a lot of things are very real scenarios. And honestly, just about most of what I've researched on China, Russia, their end game, even going back to some of the military speeches that leaked out of China, their goal is to overtake the United States. And that's not some conspiracy. It's not some psyop. And you can go back to the literature that was, snuck out, that was not supposed to be snuck out, or it's been scrubbed from the internet. And you can find that they're very, very blatant about the fact that they want to take over American land, actually, and primarily because they need our farmland. They cannot produce enough food from their own land to feed their own citizens. Not to mention, America has always been the superpower that's kept communism in check around the world. So, if you look at, is there an old pact between the Soviet, the KGB, the CCP to bring us down? There may very well be. But even not, let's not even look at that kind of scenario. Even if we're just looking at what's happening in our country, we're already seeing just from the lockdowns, from the store closures. Now we've got these truckers, which are doing amazing things. Honk honk, good job, truckers. But these are all going to affect our food supply and our supply chain. So maybe you've gone to your local grocery store and you've realized that A, steak is now 20 or 30% more expensive, or B, they don't have any steak. They don't have any eggs. They don't have any cheese, right? So that's one other thing about this is that what we used to think that, okay, you just walk into local Kroger or Meyer or Whole Foods and buy your groceries, but that might change really quickly. Now, if you're talking about prepping and the overall idea about prepping, I really want to frame this in the right light. I'm not a doomsday kind of person. If you know me, you know I'm not. Right. I always have hope. And even after the interview with Jeff, honestly, I still have a lot of hope. because I believe that there is a spiritual revival happening around the world, and the best laid plans, I think, it doesn't matter because whether they're man's plans, because I think ultimately God is in control. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to have some difficult times ahead of us. So could there be another round of a, bioweapon that's released? Could what we have seen, could it have been version 1, 1.0, and maybe there's a 2.0 coming? Maybe. Could the jabs finally catch up? And with a lot of the experts, what they're talking about, like Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, et cetera, could we start to see more of a fallout from those? Which would certainly, if we had a lot of mass death happening, that would certainly disrupt our society, potentially. Could we see some sort of civil war break out as we approach, say, 2024 potentially? There's a lot of things that could happen. So my idea with prepping is that I don't think that you should just run off and go and spend all this money and start building a bunker somewhere. For me, a lot of it is about returning to a traditional lifestyle. If you watch Little House on the Prairie, or if you talk to your grandparents, I remember my great grandparents lived through the Depression. And my grandma always had a root cellar. She always had a huge garden. And it was just how she lived. She knew how to fish. She knew where the rivers were. She knew where she could get, fruit and nuts in the forest surrounding her home. And that was just how she lived. And so while there are certain things I'm doing to focus on prepping and preparing my family for what could be a difficult time ahead of us. At the same time, I'm also trying to return to tradition, right? Like every other day, my wife and I are baking a big loaf of beautiful bread with nice flour. Every day, I'm gathering eggs from my chickens. We've got greens growing indoors that we can use for beautiful salads. So to me, a lot of this is about a way of life because I'm not sure about you, but for me, I've become really sick of the modern world. I've become really, yeah, I guess sick is the best word with what the modern world has become and what they're pushing us towards. And I want to return to tradition. I want to return to living off the land, raising my children on the land. Getting back, really tuned into what nature's telling me and everything. So that's what a lot of this is about for me. So I'll talk about that. So one thing I want to start with is a resource. There's one, so I've read a lot of books on prepping, and just to give you a little bit of background, I probably started looking into prepping seriously maybe around 6 or 7 years ago. It was when I was living in New York City, which was probably one of the worst places to live if you're concerned about what could be happening, right? But there's one book I'll show you, and the link for this book is in the description. This book is called Survival Theory: A Preparedness Guide, and it was written by a guy named Jonathan, Hollerman. And so Jonathan Hollerman, what one of his roles, he was in, I think he was in the Army or Marine Corps, one of the different branches, but he would actually train Navy SEALs on survival. So he would literally go into Alaska and these areas with these SEALs and teach them how to live. So he wrote this book, Survival Theory. He also has a series of fiction books, which are very good, but this is more of his how to book. And again, this link is in the description. I do recommend you get it because this book walks you through the absolute worst case scenario. Uh, so aside, save from a nuclear bomb being dropped and just killing us all, or us, having fallout, really the worst case scenario is an EMP, right? So an EMP is it's electromagnetic pulse. And so what an EMP does, and there's a variety of ways that an enemy can use an EMP. You can actually detonate a nuke above a country, and the fallout, it doesn't necessarily kill us from the fallout, but it fries all of our electronics. And that's the purpose of an EMP. An EMP destroys all of your electronics, your cell phone, your computer. If you have a car that was built after, I think, the late 70s, that car will no longer work because anything that has a computer and microchip, et cetera, in it gets fried and stops working. And a lot of experts believe that if an EMP were to go off and cover the entirety of our country, they believe that within a year, that there'd be, I think the number is between 70 and 90% of people would perish in our entire country. So it's really serious. I hope this doesn't happen in our country, obviously. But if you hear people talking about threats, an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, is probably one of the biggest threats that we have. So Josh wrote this, or sorry, Jonathan wrote his entire book around the scenario of an EMP. Now, in his prepping, he goes very serious into having, like, a basically a small base built in the woods somewhere to escape to. Now, I haven't done that, right? But the thing that he does really good job at doing, though, is really walking through the scenario, and in this book, he gives you a list at every point, what kinda supplies he recommends, if what kind of guns, what kind of ammunitions, backpacks, just he walks you through all the things that you could need. And so I think that's really important because, again, what is it? Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. So if you want to get a good guide on everything, I would recommend that. And one thing in general is that if there is some sort of disaster situation, right? Say we do enter in some sort of kinetic war with China or Russia, or say there's an EMP, or say there's a collapse of the dollar, we might see the internet go down. And so one important thing is anything that you're relying on, the internet for, you should think of ways to not be relying on it. And so today in today's show, I brought a lot of stuff to show you. So one thing I'm gonna show you is that, um, books books, and I there's this is a book I have called How to Survive Off the Grid. Um, Here's a book, th this is a good one I recommend called, Country, Wisdom, and Know-How. These are just books I bought on Amazon. Again, I don't like supporting Jeff Bezos, but, it's convenient and easy, and right now I'm just trying to focus on convenience and easy. Here's another big book. This is a massive book, right, called Survival, Wisdom, and Know-How, right? So these are like, I bought these books. I haven't referenced them very much, but I bought these books just in case if something goes wrong, if the internet goes down, if you need to know how to process a rabbit, right? If you need to know how to set a trap for a rabbit, you can't Google these things. And so, like, my experience, I can Google just about anything and learn how to do something. But if there's no internet, you don't want to be without that knowledge. So, um, I don't have a list anywhere. Perhaps it'd probably be good for me to do that for you. But I highly recommend just going on to Amazon or Barnes and Noble or your local bookstore and buy a handful of books. Buy books on treatment. Buy books on natural. I've got books on natural and herbal remedies, right? So, say my daughter has a fever, this book will tell me which herbs I can find on my property to go help with that. So, knowledge is so important. And again, don't have if you're relying on Google. Even if you're reading your Bible on Google and that or on online, that's it. Like, get a physical copy. You don't want to, don't want to have it disappear. So again, just look through whatever bookstore you have, find a handful of books. You can go to a used bookstore and get them because these books could literally save your life. I've got books on how to build a house, how to build a small cabin. So if I have to do plumbing or anything, I have all those resources there. I've got an extensive library, which is also a passion of mine because I enjoy reading and I enjoy collecting books probably more than I enjoy reading. So I think I buy about 10 books for every half book I read. But that's something I recommend. Even something like this, right? This is just this little book called the SAS Survival Guide. It's a tiny little book. And let's just say that you had to flee and you toss this in your backpack. Well, it has all kinds of stuff in here, even how to build a shelter, how to build a lean-to, how to process a deer, how to smoke meat, how to fish, right? These little books could be invaluable. Um, the other thing, which we'll get into this a little bit later in terms of, currency, there's a lot of questions about currency, but bartering might become a big part of society, right? If there is a scenario like an EMP that goes off, um, your cash in a lot of ways becomes useless. Gold and silver, which I'm going to talk about gold and silver a little bit later today, they might have some use, and as economy stabilizes after disaster, they'll have even more use. So I'd recommend that. But you might find that you could trade a book for 1,000 rounds of ammo, or you could trade 50 pounds of rice for a knife that you need. So we'll get into bartering a little bit here. So yeah, so my first kind of topic was just covering books and just the importance of that. So the next thing is that I have my little list here. So you see me looking up there and looking at my list, um, is where you're living. Okay. So in 2019, I was living in New York City in an apartment on the 31st floor of a building, right? I moved out, that year, but I if you look, I know that people can't just up and move. It's not easy. But if you are living in an apartment, basically the closer you are to the city center, the higher risk you are in a disaster scenario. It's just the reality. I'm not saying that you have to go change everything, right? But you should think about it. If you want to protect your family, I know it's convenient to live inside of a city. Well, maybe you can move 30 minutes out and you have to drive, right? I know that you might have certain circumstances, but that's the best advice, the biggest piece of advice I have is try to get far away from the big cities. And again, you may not be able to. I understand that, but I'm still going to give you my advice because uh, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I was living in New York City. I'm now living out in the country on 5 acres of land, and I'm living in a home that would probably be a quarter of the cost of a small apartment in New York City. Actually, I'll show you really quick because I have some visual aids for you, some fun things. So my view went from being the 31st floor of an apartment building to this. So this is now my. I'm going to show you more of my personal life, and this is my backyard. That's my chicken coop that I built, and I'm gonna talk about chickens, in this, definitely, as you would probably guess, but this is my life now. I moved from the city into a suburban area and, was renting for about a year until we found the right place, and we were in the Columbus area. It was very expensive, just, kind of an average family home for my size of my family was 3, 4, $500,000, and so we moved to the country. I've got 5 acres of land, much less expensive. My taxes are a couple $1,000s a year, and I've had to make some lifestyle changes. Now, thankfully, as you see, I'm not going into an office to work somewhere, so I'm thankful for that. But if you can make any kind of arrangements, I highly recommend it. Now, if you are in a city though, and I've had people to ask me about this, we're going to get into indoor growing and a few things like that. But the one thing is that space can become a limitation. And I will tell you that if say you're living in an apartment in a big city, the one thing I would recommend for you is that if there is any kind of disaster scenario, do not plan on surviving in your apartment. You should already be talking to friends or family. They might think you're a little kooky, right? But if you say, hey, say your mom lives 30 minutes outside the city, or your aunt, or your good friend, or your sister, talk to them and say, hey, look, if things really get bad, do you think I could come stay with you until things settle? And I'm sure that in most scenarios, your family would say, yeah, of course. Uh, you do not want to be in the big city for a lot of different reasons. And actually, he goes in the book, he talks about that. I'm not sure if it's in his survival guide or the fiction series, but he talks about what happens in the cities because, again, if there's a disaster scenario, what is going to happen is eventually you're going to have the gangs that are roaming and they're going to be starving because most people are not preparing. And that's something you have to be really, really cognizant about. Most people in America are not preparing. Maybe they have a week's worth of food. And even your neighbor who you get along with great, if your neighbor after 2 weeks is seeing his little daughter starving, he's going to break into your home. He's going to break into your apartment to get your food. It's just it really does become the survival of the fittest at that point. So you have to be prepared for that. It's a very real reality. Now, I'm not saying we turn into animals against each other, but you just have to accept that once people hit the level of starvation, a father will always prioritize his children over you and your family. And so you can take that to whatever extent you want to think about it. But also, an important point with that is that if you are preparing, say you live in a suburban area, in a neighborhood, or you don't want to talk about your preparing. Now, thankfully, you don't know where I live. I'm here being very open. I'm talking about, how I'm preparing. I'm showing you pictures of my land. But you don't want to be telling too many people. Of course, your immediate family, you can tell them and you can say, hey, look, I'm doing this, but you don't want a lot of people to know because let's just say that things do get difficult. Well, that neighbor is going to be like, hey, you know what? Seth told me he's got a couple 100 pounds of rice. He can share with my family and before you know it, if you talk about that too much, if things get hairy, you're gonna have 5 families showing up for your food. And not to say we shouldn't help our neighbors out, but you may not have an option to replenish your food store. So you might have had 6 months worth of food set aside, and now you're down to 1.5 months. because your neighbors didn't prepare on their own, and now they're going to be taking advantage of you preparing, but you just lost 4.5 months worth of feeding your own family. So that's just just a word of caution. I would try to approach it in that manner. So the number one thing, so getting into the actual kind of nuts and bolts of this, the number one thing you have to consider is your water. Okay. You can survive for around 3 weeks without eating food. You don't last more than a couple of days without water. So, the general rule of thumb for preparing for water is that if it's for drinking only, you want about 1 gallon per adult per day. Now, in terms of how long are you trying to prepare for? Should you prepare for a month? Should you prepare for 3 weeks or 3 months? Me personally, I'm making it my goal to be. I think right now I'm probably prepared for about 6 months. I can feed my family. My goal is to be a year, but my goal really is to become self-sufficient enough that through what I can harvest from my own land, that if I had to, I can really buckle down and hopefully live off of my own land for to longer than that. So let's just say that I would honestly, though, I would make it your goal if right now you're not prepared at all, I would make it your goal to get to at least 90 days. Because let's just say there is a major issue that happens. Say there is an EMP or of some sort, and say it's only regional. Say it only hits a part of the country, but it might turn the entire country into a disaster zone. If you can get through that first month, the second month, the third month, and you hunker down, then you might be able to. By that point, there's more stability, and you can maybe the military stabilize things, and you have a better chance. So I would aim for at least 90 days. So if you've got 4 people in your family, right? Say, you, your wife, and your 2 children or 2 teenage children. If you have 4 people and you want to prepare for 90 days, you're looking at 4 gallons per day. So that's about 360 gallons of water. One thing with water is that water can go bad, so you can get little droplets to help your water from going bad and how you store it. The other thing I would recommend is if you can set up some sort of rainwater catching system, even online, you can go to various places. You can buy a 50-gallon rain barrel that has a little fitment that it fits into your downspout off of your house, so that way you can collect rainwater. So because that gallon I'm talking about per day is only for drinking. If you're using water for drinking and hygiene and flushing toilets, it's about 3 gallons per day. So if you have a rainwater collection system, that can go a long way with helping, giving you bath water, etc. The other thing I would highly recommend is there's a few different variations of what they call like a life straw. This is one by Sawyer, and so this is a little straw that you can. I'm not sure if you see the picture there, but the straw goes. You can attach it to a water bottle, and so you can filter around 100,000 gallons of water from this. Because if you look at, say, Haiti is still having issues with cholera and different diseases because their water system was so filthy. And bad water, dirty water is the fastest way to kill your whole family. Is if you're going to some creek to drink and that creek has, say someone died in up creek and whatever killed them is infecting the water sources. So, boiling water, obviously, but these life straws. So actually, this is a life straw. This is another brand. You can get these online if you search for, water straw, etc. You can get those online. This one does, I think, 1,000 gallons, and this mini one does 100,000 gallons. So that's a really important thing because, let's just say that you're collecting rainwater, you don't want to go just drink that rainwater. There could be bacteria and stuff in it, and our human beings, our gut flora and our bodies are not made to handle water. 1,000 years ago, you could drink from the river directly. It was also a lot less polluted, but some of these could be lifesavers. Absolutely. So water is a really big deal. Even if you go to Costco and you're buying just the 1 gallon, bottles, which is that's what I've done. I've got a whole shelf in my garage with bottles of water and 1 gallon, waters and everything like that. In addition, once the snow finishes melting, I'm setting up a rain catchment system because that way I've always got water from the rain, but I can use that water to feed my get to my chickens. I can use the water for my garden, etc. So water collection is important. If your state like California, there's certain areas where they've banned water collection, I I'd have a hard time obeying those rules. So I'm not going to say, yeah, just obey the rules of your corrupt state. but maybe you have to do it in a little more sneaky of a way. So water. Now let's get into food. So one thing, let's say I've got a handful of things. So okay, the most basic. So with food, this is a much more complicated thing. I could spend an entire hour talking about food storage. So I'm not. I'm going to try to summarize a few of the basic points of it. Again, you want to look at being able to feed your family for say 90 days. That's our goal, right? So working out 2,000 calories per person. You can do your calculations. They've got tons of online calculators. You can download spreadsheets that help you do your food planning. But the one thing you also find is that as you start preparing and you start buying bulk, you end up saving a lot of money. So again, as I mentioned before, like I'm trying to change my lifestyle. So the modern lifestyle, it's really set up. So you go to the local grocery store and you might buy a can of beans or you might buy a box of cereal, but you're buying small quantities and you're paying the highest price possible because you're buying it in the smallest quantity possible. So for a lot of things, I try to buy bulk. It takes a little more money up front because you're buying a bigger amount, but you'll save so much more money. So actually, I'll show you. Let's see, I have a picture of my pantry. So this is literally my pantry. Um, I've got other areas where I'm storing food, but you can't really see here very well, but I've got, gallons and gallons of maple syrup, lots of flour, seaweed, healthy things like that, and greens, lots of canned food. So, and this is all stuff that we regularly eat, but I've just stored it. And so I buy very large quantities. I've also got a different area set up where I'm storing more of the bulk things. Rice, for instance, in terms of, pound for pound, you can buy 50 pounds of rice for nothing, or not nothing. It ends up costing money, but again, like maybe I've got 300, 400 pounds of rice just sitting. And so, as I mentioned before, with bartering, let's just say that I need a lighter. I could maybe give someone 2 cups of rice for a lighter. So, and again, as we get into currency discussion, we'll talk about that. But a lot of what you're saving now in that kind of scenario where you can't just use your credit card to buy something, the things that you're setting aside now could become currency. There's a very, very real possibility of that. Even ammunition, which we'll be getting into ammunition and guns today, but even ammunition will become a currency in that kind of situation. And 50 rounds of 9 millimeter, you'll be surprised how much you could trade and get for that. So, but looking at food, there's all kinds of different types of food. I'm sure you've heard of My Patriot Supply, or there's a mount. I forget the name of it, Mountain something. I personally don't. I haven't bought any of those kinds of big prepared meals. I've got MREs. So MREs are meal ready to eat. This is just literally just military food. It lasts a long time. You've got everything that you need in here. You don't have to have water to cook it. It activates a little packet and it heats itself up. So MREs are really good. You can buy all kinds of other preserved food. If you are really taking this seriously, which would recommend it, get into preserving your own food. If you can learn how, like I bought a vacuum sealer and I bought a food dehydrator. So if it's like, so say in the fall, when apples are really inexpensive, there's local orchards I go to, buy a few bushels of apples and dehydrate them into fruit leather, so you can actually preserve apples. Or we've got fruit trees on our property, which I plan on planting more of them. But I've got fruit trees that are dropping, probably had a couple hundred pears that drop from one pear tree. So I'm dehydrating those types of things because you can dehydrate, and dehydrated fruit will last years. So it's not about, there are budget ways to prep. That's the thing, is that one really important point overall is it can be overwhelming and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I have to buy all this stuff." Like, I've been slowly chipping away at it, right? So even it is next time you go to the grocery store, say, "You know what? I'm gonna go to Costco instead, and I'm gonna buy bulk this first time." Or I'm gonna, say you're buying, canned food, buy extra canned food, right? You can slowly ration things away. And honestly, even if you put $50 a month into prepping and buying food and water extra right now, and you're buying these things in bulk, after a couple of months, you're already gonna have way more food supply than the average family in America. So don't let it get too overwhelming. My goal here is just to give you like the big picture, and you can then look and see what you want to do with that. So again, I'm not going to go into food. Like I said, there's food calculators. You can see what you need. If you want to go the route, it's expensive, but if you have the money to say sink 5 grand into a say 6 month supply of prepackaged food from one of the My Patriot Supply or one of those kinds of companies, great. But if you can't, well, look, then I'm not doing that. To me, I'd rather buy a couple 100 pounds of rice and a couple hundred cans of beans and a freezer full of meat. And that's the other thing is that so I've got one fridge in my main house. I've got one extra fridge in my garage and two deep freezers. So when I buy my meat, for instance, I buy my meat half cow at a time. So you save money, but you've also got a great supply of meat. So my chickens, I buy my chickens in bulk, and I keep them all frozen. So I've been going to the freezer for steak for months now. I walk in the freezer, I pull out a steak, even nice filet mignon that comes from the nice cow, and that's where I get my meat from. And so that's a big thing too. Is that again, if you buy things in bulk like that, you're going to be better off. Now, obviously, a freezer needs to be supplied with power, which we're going to talk about power. But it's just again, it's a shift in your attitude. It's a shift in your mentality and you'll find that once you start making that change, it's incredible. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about chickens, and I will be brief because I have a lot of stuff to get through. But I this past year I built my own chicken coop, and so let's see, I have some pictures to show you just to give you an idea. So this is the chicken coop I built. This was it. I built it first in my garage to get all the framing together, and then I took it, broke it down in a couple different pieces, and then I carried it out to the land. So this was look, I'm just a hobby carpenter. This is something that you could probably do yourself. I bought this chicken coop plan on Etsy, and then I modified it a little bit. I made it bigger. So that's the chicken coop. And here's once it went outside. Once I put it outside, so off the back of it, it's what you call a run. That's an 8 foot wide by 20 foot, 24 foot long cage. So during the winter, for instance, the chickens stay only in their run. They don't go out. They're not messing around with the snow. Um, but it also what it does is it keeps the predators out. So during the night, some of my chickens, like I have barred rocks, which I'll show you some my chickens. So the barred rocks, which are the striped ones, they like sleeping outside, for instance. So, and again, I'm not going to go into detail about the chicken coop or the chicken run. I could do an entire episode on that. But this has been very, very fulfilling. And I've got 14 hens. I don't have any roosters and I'm getting about 10 beautiful eggs every day. And so I've greatly increased the eggs that we're eating as a family. And I've got so many eggs coming in, they're faster than what I can eat, that I'm actually going to be looking into freeze drying or seeing how I can preserve eggs. But again, if you're looking at a barter system, but if you have chickens that are laying and you can barter eggs, one egg, a dozen eggs could get you a gallon of gasoline, and that gallon of gasoline could fuel your car to, for X task, or it could fuel a tractor that you're using. So, the beautiful things with this is, yes, there's an upfront cost. I think that the chicken coop I bought it's more premium, and I really built it to last. But you can probably you can build a basic chicken coop for a couple $100. And if you're really on a budget, you can go to places like Habitat for Humanity or even use pallets or scrap wood, and you can build it for little to nothing. Mine ended up costing probably closer to $1,500 to $2,000 because I've got heavy duty wire on it, and I painted it. It's all treated wood, treated lumber, and wood prices have gone up since COVID, so that's also part of it. I've got a shingled roof and everything, but the chickens, they eat all of our scraps. My daughter is 1.5 years old. She wastes a lot of food. And so we have a little bin. And after she's done eating, I say, okay, June, like time to feed the chickens. Are you done? Don't feed the floor. She used to throw it on the floor. But now we say, okay, feed the chickens. And she puts her excess food in the little chicken bin. And then we take the chicken bin out. If food goes bad, etc., we can feed the chickens. So now there is some cost with chicken feed you have to consider that this is part of it. But for us, we free range our chickens. Like I said, we have about 5 acres. And so when there's not snow on the ground, they're getting the majority of their food from our grass and they're going into the woods and everything. And again, to have 10 eggs show up every day, that could be a lifesaver. And that's why though I didn't want to spend that kind of money on a chicken coop. But I thought about it, and it's like, you know what? If the grocery store doesn't have eggs anymore, how much are these eggs worth? Right? One egg could be worth 2 or $3 in the future. So just kind of that's how I'm looking at those things. Okay, so moving on from chicken. So gardening, um, I'm not going to go heavy into gardening again. This is just an hour long overview, but there's a few things. One is seeds. Stock up on seeds. You can get something like this, right? This is just something I bought a couple of years ago. It's just this is just a set of backup seeds, right? They call it a survival garden. So just in case, you can get this online. I bought it from Amazon a couple of years back, and it's just sealed. I'll probably never use it, but as a backup, it's good to have. That's the thing is a lot of these things, you can buy them now, maybe that cost me 15 bucks. In the future, how much are heirloom seeds gonna be worth if there's a difficult situation? You may not be able to get them at that time, right? So, you have to think a lot of things that you could get very easily now and see might it's very easy to overlook these things. In the future, they may not be available. So stock up now on these. For my gardening though, I use a company called Fedco. It's Fedco. So if you search for Fedco seeds, that's where I order all of our seeds. We only plant organic. I'm a big stickler about not having anything overly processed, and I never do GMO, and I try to do organic as much as possible because the more you look into again, what are we seeing now in our society? It's big pharma. They're not really the good guys. Well, if you go into Monsanto, you go into all the poisoning that's actually in our food system, especially in the United States. Chemtrails are bad enough. I'll do an episode on chemtrails at one of these points. But so I really try to eat as much as possible with organic. But I buy my seeds organic. In terms of gardening them, outside we've got raised beds. So I just moved about 6 months ago. I haven't planted them yet, but I just bought we had a big concrete cement pad that was a basketball court, and so I lined the edges of it with, cinder blocks, and I made raised beds. Next winter, I'm gonna have little greenhouse contraptions I'm gonna build so I can plant through the winter, but, in my house I was renting, I built raised bed gardens, and you can get an incredible amount of food from those. So, if you're not if you're just new to gardening, it's a lot easier than you think. There's a book just look up the square foot gardening method, just square foot gardening. It's a really easy way to understand how to garden, and you basically make a grid and you section off, okay, how many tomato plants per square foot, how many peppers, how many beans. So I would really recommend that. I've been really experimenting more so my wife is behind a lot of the work with indoor gardening. So I'll show you just a little setup that we have. Let me see here. Okay, so this is our one of our front rooms that just kind of faces. This is a lot of natural light. Obviously, you can see it's covered in snow, but this is our setup that we're using for indoor gardening. So you can see on the left we've got arugula, we have scallions, cilantro. On the right we have kale and tomato plants growing. That's a little mini greenhouse that I built there. Um, and then in the middle, those 2 big trees, it looks small from the picture, but one of those is a lemon tree and one of those is a lime tree. So we'll have citrus growing, which, vitamin C, really important. I've got a lattice in the window there. Now, if you want to learn more about indoor gardening, and I'll share this in my Telegram, but there is a Telegram group. There's a guy named he goes by William Welker, by William Wallace Welker. Let me show you. This is his Telegram page, and this is I highly would recommend following him. It's a fantastic resource, and so this is his indoor setup, and he teaches you. He goes, okay, the topic for this channel is self-responsible food production, education, health, energy, culture, and technology. It's a wealth of information. Even looking at how to raise chickens, he's raising quail, how to even to raise mealworms to feed your chickens, which that's something we're also experimenting with. So he's really all about self-sufficiency and learning how to be self-sufficient. So again, this is William Wallace Welker. And so I will share this on my Telegram after I finish the show, but I would recommend giving that channel a follow. There's also a chicken channel. I think it's called Make Chickens Great Again, which I'll share after the show as well for you. Okay, so now we're gonna pass gardening. I got a lot to cover quickly here still because I want this episode to be a big picture overview for you. So beyond gardening, heating and energy. This is really important. If you can, I highly recommend trying to get a wood stove. Just make sure that you find a good contractor to install it, because if it's done improperly, it can lead to fire, or your insurance won't pay for your house if it's done improperly. But having a wood burning stove is really important. We're in the process of getting one set up. Won't have it for this winter, but for next winter, I'll have a wood stove installed. But for its if there is any kind of power outage long term, especially in the colder months, a wood stove allows you to cook and it allows you to heat your home, which are obviously very, very important. And if you live near woods, you've got unlimited resources of fuel. If you don't, then you can buy a couple cords of firewood, keep it in your garage, keep it in the shed. That's important. The other thing that I've done personally is I've bought a bunch of, like the five, they're 5 gallon, the propane tanks that you get for your grill. So I've bought maybe 10 of those that are full. I keep them stored. And I also bought a little attachment that you can use for heating. You can also get, they have these little propane tanks here, which you can use for cooking as a fuel source. A little single burner can attach to those. Those are really helpful. But the bigger propane tanks, I have a heater that I could use for heating my home. I also bought a single burner attachment. So you can basically attach like a single propane burner to these. So just look in case things get really hairy, I've still got a good propane source to cook off of, obviously, or to heat. The other thing is fuel. So gasoline. I've got about 100 gallon gas tank, fuel tank that I've got. I had it in my garage. Don't do that. It's not safe. I actually had a fire warden who reached out to me. He's like, "Don't store your gasoline in your garage." I was like, "Okay." So if you're storing gas, store it outside. Find a place for it. So again, to save up, because if one of these situations happens, a gallon of gas could be the equivalent value of 30, 40, $50, right? Because it's scarcity that makes something valuable. And in these situations where you no longer have gas trucks, if the gas stations run out of gas, right, your 100 gallons of gas could be a gold mine. Not that you'd sell it, but that again, it's about survival in that scenario. Okay, so, also, if you look at, solar is something you can look into. I'm looking into getting, they have these solar kits where you can buy these little fold-out solar panels and a little, charging station and battery pack where you can charge electronics or, say, like a power tool, etcetera. That's one thing. The other thing as it relates to power is generator. The first thing I did when I moved into my new house was I installed a Generac, a whole house generator. We're on natural gas. So basically, like, let's say the power goes down right now, which right now we're having an ice storm in Ohio. This is ice storms are usually we have the power go out because the power lines get heavier from the ice. They fall, power goes out. The generator is powered by natural gas hooked up directly to the utility. And the generator kicks on within a minute, and the entire house has power again. So they're expensive though, but if you can get a whole house generator, if you can't, I've also got a little Craftsman generator. I think it was maybe 400 or $500 I bought at the beginning of COVID, so that you can also run just using your gasoline, or you can also get one that hooks up to a propane tank, so you can run your generator to keep your freezers going. Or because look, if you've got a half a cow or a whole cow in your freezers, it could be a couple $1,000s worth of meat. You don't want that to go bad. So if you have a backup generator, you'd rather go through 10, 20 gallons of gasoline to keep that meat okay, because you're powering the fridge. So generators are really important. A quick note, just in terms of overall purchasing, is if you have pets, if you have a dog, if you have a cat, buy their dog food and cat food ahead of time. Don't wait for their food to run out. It's not going to be a good situation. So just think about them right now. Stick it in your basement. Go buy 20 bags of dog food and just set it aside, or cat food, etc. We don't have any cats. I've got chickens. So I got a lot of chicken food I'm prepping and, storing chicken food, but, that's not for me. But if you do have dogs or cats, etcetera, highly recommend that. So now I wanna talk about medical and hygiene. I forgot to bring down, I have a kit, which I didn't bring it down with me, but I have a medical kit, and it was maybe like $100 online, and it's basically all the kind of medicine that you would need for your typical emergency. The closer you can get to the kind of a kit that, say, an EMT would carry, the better. If you're buying, your medicine kit, don't just get Band-Aids and, some gauze and some stuff like that. Ideally, look for a kit that has trauma treatment in it. So, look, maybe you have a gunshot wound you have to treat. I'm not sure how bad things are gonna get. Or say you're cutting wood and you slipped on the way down, you put an axe into your foot and you have to stitch it up, right? So I would really recommend, because again, what you're preparing for is a situation where the normal things that you rely on aren't available. So you might have to stitch up your own foot, right? So it could get pretty bad. So it's really, really important that you have a really good first aid kit. And again, try to find a first aid kit that has some of the trauma supplies in it, tourniquets, et cetera, because that could be very, very important. And in addition to that, as I mentioned before with the book discussion, if you can find a book on basic kind of EMT first responder type medicine, or the training for how to do that, or if you can take some local training at your fire department on the basic stuff, I highly, highly recommend it. But even a book, like if your daughter's running and she falls and she cuts her arm open and she's bleeding really bad, you can't Google what to do. So if you have a book you can look at and say, okay, how to stitch something up, how to prepare a wound, how to dress a wound, could be really important. So don't overlook the importance of medical supplies. The other thing is that if you are on medication, really consider that. If you're on insulin, if you are on some sort of heart medication, any kind of medication that you require, you should, again, we're preparing for 90 days. For medication, I'd recommend doing at least double that. So if you got 3 months, try to get to 6 months, right? So because this is really important. If you're on a medication that you need to sustain your life, I highly recommend that you prep and you set aside some of that medication. Some of the medications that I'm not allowed to talk about on here that that they use for the horses and stuff like that. If you can get that, great. You can set that aside. It'll help you with jab injury type stuff. There's different Z Stack from Zelenko, any of these medications that you can get, I would highly recommend that. Set those aside. Other thing for preparing is just overall hygiene. If you're not able to wash your hands properly, if you're not able to clean your dishes properly, all of these things will lead to you getting sick. So make sure you have a large supply, I guess as large as you can, of hand soap, bleach, peroxide, cleaning materials, apple cider vinegar, which is very useful. A lot of the kind of things like that that you would need: sanitizer, toilet paper, feminine products, deodorant, toothbrushes. These are all things you should consider. Even for my daughter, I've already got probably 3 months worth of diapers of the next size or two stored away but also I went and I bought a bunch of cloth diapers, because if I can't be using the disposable diapers, and we'll use cloth diapers. So it's really about this look at, and if you want a good lesson or a good um, exercise for how to prepare properly, write down all the things that you use in a week: toilet paper, shampoo, toothpaste, dishwasher detergent, all the things that you use in a week. And then that's going to show you, it's like, could you do without those things? It's like, oh, I better get some supplies on those things. Even if you have glasses, I recommend getting a couple pairs of backup glasses, because if you're working and your glasses break, you can't go to the eye doctor anymore. If there's a situation where things are really shut down. So even a cheap pair of eyeglasses could go a long way. Other thing is a watch, right? This is a little Citizen Eco Drive watch. It was maybe like $100, but it charges from the sun. But again, telling time is going to be really important. So if you're having a rendezvous with somebody, or you're trying to meet somebody somewhere that family is or something, again, you may not have a cell phone to tell you the time. You may not have a digital clock. So having a watch is a very good idea. Okay, so hygiene, we got that. So protection. Now this is an important one, because let's just say that you're in your neighborhood and you've got all this food, but your neighbor doesn't. You have to really think about protection. Now, again, if you watch the interview with Jeff Nyquist, you're thinking, okay, I got to fend off communist soldiers, maybe. Well, maybe. So, protection is good. So, would recommend, so this is a Glock. This is a Glock 19X. This is my kind of handgun of choice. Um, so I would recommend you get a gun. Now, check your rules. Okay, if you live in New York City, you can't have a gun. So for one thing, don't get in trouble. Check on what you can buy in your area, but prioritize gun safety. That's the really important thing. Is go and take some classes on how to use your gun. They can be very dangerous, but if you're in a situation where someone's trying to come into your house to steal your food that you're using to feed your family, or they're coming in, violently, having a handgun that's sitting in your holster, or that's, again, if there's a disaster scenario, I'm carrying this thing everywhere. I'm carrying it when I'm sleeping, right? If there's any kind of scenario like that. So there's a few basics though. I would recommend a basic handgun, 9 millimeter, Glock, Smith and Wesson, M&P. There's a handful of guns that are quite affordable. Even a couple $100, you can get a used 9 millimeter at your local pawn shop. Not a bad idea if you're budgeting. But a gun, again, I'm not a person that pushes for violence. I'm a very peaceful person. I would never want to harm somebody. But if I'm in a situation where, say you're even driving to the store, like you have to go, say there's a place where there's a food bank, and you're driving your truck, you might be carjacked. So being able to protect yourself is so critical. With along with that is ammunition, right? These are just little 50 round, 50 round packages of 9 millimeter. I bought these recently. These were $22. So $22 for 50 rounds of 9 millimeter. Um, so if you can, again, ammunition in a lot of ways, I look at it as a currency. And if there's a difficult situation, honestly, 50 rounds of 9 millimeter, you could trade this for enough food to feed your family for 2 weeks. Like that's how valuable ammunition could be. And I see someone in the comments saying guns are illegal in New York City. Guns are illegal in New York City, not New York State. You can't even have a BB gun in New York City. Trust me, I looked. In New York State, you can, but there's also very strict rules. They have limits for um, your um, your magazines, everything like that. So it's very strict, but you can own guns. My recommendation is, and I won't go into detail on this, but there's three main guns I would recommend if you really want to equip yourself. There's a handgun, like what I just showed you. I recommend Glock, but you can find one that you like. A 9 millimeter. You want to find a gun that has a common ammunition. Don't get some interesting, Blackmore, or whatever, kind of, or Blackout, or any kind of special ammunition because it sounds cool. I'd go with the very, very basic 9 millimeter 223. Um, is a handful of basic, 12 gauge shotgun. So I'd recommend a handgun, like the Glock, a shotgun. Right, shotguns are excellent for home defense. They're longer barreled ones. They're easier to aim. Right, so if you have someone that's not as good of a marksman, it's actually quite difficult to hit a moving target with a handgun. But with a barrel that you're aiming like this, it's a lot easier to hit. And then some kind of rifle. If you can, get a basic AR-15, they're not that expensive. They've got a lot of stopping power. They're very accurate, long range. So again, say you can only get one or two guns, I'd recommend at the basic a handgun and a shotgun. So I would recommend that. One thing also in terms of self defense is a good knife. I like knives, so this is more of a survival knife right here. There's a brand called Tops that makes knives. This is more of a survival knife that if I had to go forage in the woods, or if I had to even cut firewood, etc., I can do that. But a good pocket knife, a good knife you can carry on your person while you're out and about. Again, if you have to go somewhere where it's a little bit dangerous, having that knife could make a really big difference for you. Um, so that's it for guns and ammunition. The other thing too, again, with safety is storage. Store it properly. Keep it away from your children. Keep it locked up. Keep it accessible though, right? So there's a variety of ways of doing that. You can get little safes that have biometric. You open it up next to your bed, etc. So that there's that. Um, the other thing, so actually, I forgot to mention with energy. Now we're going to get into kind of more gear. So one thing I would recommend is some sort of radio. This is just like a little hand crank radio. So it also serves as a flashlight. So you can turn on the flashlight, you can crank it. I've got a bunch of little hand crank flashlights as well. I would recommend that you really do well with stocking up flashlights and lighting. I see someone mentioning archery. Yes, archery is also a very good idea. I'd recommend a crossbow with an easy pull on it over a bow and arrow because they're a lot more close to being a gun and they're easier because you're just pulling a trigger instead of drawing back. But especially if you're hunting, it's silent, so you're not telling everybody I just killed a deer. You can if you can train with it, you can then hunt quietly with it, and to a certain degree, it's unlimited ammo. If you take care of your arrows, you retrieve your arrows, etc. So a crossbow is also a very good thing. So back into lighting though, make sure you have flashlights. Flashlights are really, really important. Like I said, I've got a bunch of hand crank flashlights. You can get solar powered flashlights, hand crank flashlights. But with that, with your supplies, is going to be batteries. Make sure you have a lot of batteries. I've got probably like I don't know, I've got hundreds and hundreds of batteries because again, batteries, that could be something you're bartering in the future. They're going to power your flashlight. In addition, lighters, not just for starting, a fire to cook with, but lighters are, for lighting candles at night, etc. I went and bought, I think I bought maybe like a 50 or 100 pack of Bix. My wife was like, why do you need so many lighters? I'm like, this is a currency one day. So make sure lighters are a good thing to have. I recommend this the Bic lighters, the same Bic lighters you see at the gas stations that most people are familiar with. That's important. Let's see, I've got okay, emergency radio, walkie-talkies for communication. If you can get a basic ham radio, which you can use for communication during a crisis, or you can hear sometimes ham radios are going to be good for the typical radio may not be broadcasting at that time. So the other thing too, there's lots of other gear I could get into, but I'm running out of time here. So communication is important, as I mentioned, radio, walkie-talkies, ham radio. The other thing is tools. Okay, power tools. Obviously, they require electricity to charge them, but good hammer, good axe, good set of screwdrivers, stock up on screws. Because what happens then if you have to board up some windows or you have to build a small enclosure for something? I even collect wood. I've got a garage. My wife doesn't like it necessarily, but I've got wood that I'm collecting that I might find some scrap wood somewhere because you never know what you might need to do with it. So tools are very, very important. And again, you may not be able to go get a drill in the future. So having a drill could be life saving. So last thing, I think I've hit everything on my list there. So last thing is looking at. Oh yeah, I see someone actually saying that liquor is a good um, bartering item. Yes, Mary sing along. Yes, liquor, of course. I don't drink alcohol, so I don't really have much liquor. But yes, if you have liquor, if you've got a store of liquor, you could trade a bottle of vodka for probably 10 pounds of rice. Especially if it's an alcoholic and he needs it, he'll probably give you like his tractor for some vodka. So that's good. The other thing I see someone else that you're mentioning, what else is mentioning is uh, cold weather. So that's really important. Good blankets, good jackets, good boots, good gloves. If again, if you don't have heat and your family has to huddle up, ideally in your basement because of the thermal mass. Ideally, you're doing it that way. But Carhartt, that's why I wear them outside. I wear mostly Carhartt stuff. Then they're now actually pushing the Vax, so I'm not really happy with them. But in general, cold weather gear is really, really important. You might have to be outside for a while. You might be in the winter. Maybe your daughter is sick, and you have to walk your daughter to your doctor neighbor 5 miles away. That could be a scenario. So that's another one. So lastly, getting into the finance, so gold and silver and crypto. I'll tell you, and this might change. I'm not a crypto person. Look, if there's a situation like this and the internet goes down, how are you going to use like crypto, right? You can't use your phone to pay somebody. So again, I'm looking at maybe crypto is a good hedge against things, and some people have made a lot of money in crypto. I'm more of an old school person. I want something I can feel, something that's tangible. So that's not me. The one thing is that make sure you have cash on hand. Look, if things really go south and if the market crashes or if we lose power, you can't go withdraw money from the ATM. And so for a certain period of time, you will have a cash society. So if you say you've got $20,000 in your checking, go pull out $5,000 cash and hide it somewhere. Right? There's a lot of places you can hide money. Don't hide money under your mattress. Don't hide money in your closet. Don't hide it in your underwear drawer. Right? Put it in a sandwich bag and go stick it up on top of your AC duct in your basement. right? Like, really, if you're gonna hide money or hide gold or precious metals, don't put it in the obvious places. Don't put a safe in your closet. Unless you have I used to work in the jewelry industry, and I had safes that were, heavy duty safes that weighed 4,000 pounds. Yes, if you have one of those, good for you. Otherwise, hide. You can even hide things in your freezer. You can hide gold and you empty out a thing of fish sticks, stick your gold in there, put it in the bottom of your freezer beneath everything else. No one's going to find it, right? Unless they're watching my show, then they're going to dig in through your freezer, right? So now again, a lot of people have asked me about putting money into gold versus the stock market. Me personally, and look, if I give you advice on something, I'm giving you the genuine advice that I live by. Like, I'm not telling you anything I wouldn't do. So I pulled all my money out of the stock market. It wasn't that much. And I had a little bit of money in Bitcoin. And this is a couple of years ago, I pulled it out as well. If any kind of saving that I have, well, for one, I'm trying to buy things I can barter with, 50-pound bags of rice, right? But I do believe that gold and silver as precious metals, it's something I really believe in. So again, if things get really bad, you might have to be bartering with gold. If things get really bad, you're not even bartering with gold. You're just bartering with items. There's no currency at first. It's just I'll trade you a gallon of gas for 10 pounds of rice. That's the kind of trading. But I think though that if we do see a market collapse with inflation, happening, the dollar could collapse in all these scenarios, I feel the safest in gold and silver, and they're both also very undervalued. So you can buy, last I checked, silver is what, $25 an ounce or something like that. So um, again, if you want to do that, I would recommend it, especially with I mean, honestly, we could see. I genuinely believe that we're entering a period where we're going to see a lot of our financial systems collapse. If you listen to X22, I know a lot of you do. He talks a lot about this. That I definitely agree with. I think that we're entering a time period where our fiat currency is going to collapse, the fake stock market is going to collapse, and at that time, now he pushes Bitcoin. Again, it's like if that stuff's all happening, I don't want my money sitting in some digital wallet somewhere. Sorry. I'd rather have it sitting in silver and gold. So if you can do that, I would recommend it. That's my genuine advice for you. So, all right. So those are I've run through my whole list. I hope that was helpful. I hope that it was not too much rambling, but actually, just kind of talking. And again, I'm genuinely trying to give you the advice just of what I've learned. I've been doing this for, like I said, 5 years, 6 years, and I've really tried to understand because for me, protecting my family is really important. And I don't like to be a doomsday kind of person, but I genuinely believe that we're going to be entering some difficult times, much more difficult than what we have right now. And so I want to be prepared for that to protect my family. And I hope that this video has been helpful for you. I hope that I hope it's not overwhelming. Take a few things I've talked about. And if you don't own a gun, okay, start looking into that, right? Go buy a basic handgun, go get some lessons at the range and do that. Or you know what? Start with an axe. If you don't have an axe, get an axe, set it in your closet, right? Your first level of self protection there, or a good knife. Again, maybe you go to Costco this weekend and you buy 50 pounds of flour, 50 pounds of rice, and 50 cans of black beans, and that's what you've done. You've already done a lot to protect your family in the future. So I'll share some of the links I talked about on my Telegram. I'm now going to do the Q&A. So as you guys are familiar with, I always do my Q&A over at Rise TV afterwards. So if you have any specific questions and you want to come try out Rise TV, it's an amazing platform. We're really building a community of patriots there, and we're really trying to come together and support each other. We have a lot of great information over there. We do a lot of live shows. If you want to join it, there's a free trial in the description. It's $10 a month if you want to stay. But as you can see, I'm still committed to doing as much content as possible on YouTube and Facebook and Rumble because I don't want to stop communicating with you. I really want to keep putting out even more content for you. I think it's really important. So thank you all so much for joining me. I'm going to go ahead and deactivate the other streams really quick and hop over to Rumble. Or sorry, not Rumble, Rise TV, which is in the description below. All right, 1 second, folks. Just getting this done. Okay, it's gonna turn off Facebook.